Relax with stories that help you sleep, work, and calm your mind. Today's story is called A Chance Meeting in the Library. We invite you to listen and support our channel by clicking subscribe and receiving channel notifications to conveniently follow the next videos. Sincerely thank you. The Boston Athenaeum stood like a sentinel of time, its ancient walls steeped in the whispers of centuries. The library's interior was a labyrinth of polished mahogany shelves, their surfaces gleaming under the soft glow of brass chandeliers. The air carried the rich, earthy scent of old paper, mingling with the faintest trace of leather bindings and wax polish. It was early autumn, and the late afternoon sun filtered through tall, arched windows, casting golden streaks across the worn oak floors. The hush of the library was sacred, broken only by the occasional rustle of pages or the soft creak of a chair. For Lena femme, this was her sanctuary, her escape from the chaos of the world beyond these walls. Lena, at 24, was a vision of quiet allure. Her petite frame, barely brushing 5'3", moved with a dancer's grace, though she'd never taken a single lesson. Her long, raven black hair cascaded in loose waves down her back, catching the light in a way that made it shimmer like liquid obsidian. Today, it was loosely tied with a silk scarf, a few rebellious strands framing her heart-shaped face. Her almond-shaped eyes, a deep chestnut brown, held a spark of curiosity and a hint of dreaminess, as if she were perpetually lost in the pages of a novel. Her lips, full and naturally pink, curved into a faint, unconscious smile as she wandered the aisles, her slender fingers trailing along the spines of books. She wore a cream-colored sweater that hugged her delicate curves, the soft fabric accentuating the gentle swell of her chest and the narrow dip of her waist. Her faded blue jeans clung to her slim legs, the denim molding to her thighs and calves in a way that was effortlessly captivating. A worn leather satchel hung from her shoulder, stuffed with notebooks and dog-eared paperbacks, her constant companions. Lena was a graduate student in literature at Boston University, but her true education came from the stories she devoured. She could lose herself in Austen's sharp wit or Bronte's wild passions, letting the words wrap around her like a lover's embrace. Today, her mission was specific: a copy of Wuthering Heights, the one book that always felt like coming home. She'd read it a dozen times, but this time, she wanted the library's rare edition, a first printing rumored to sit on the highest shelf in the Gothic literature section. Standing on her tiptoes, she stretched her lithe body upward, her sweater riding up slightly to reveal a sliver of smooth, ivory skin at her midriff. Her fingers grazed the shelf's edge, but the book remained tantalizingly out of reach. A soft huff escaped her lips, her breath stirring a stray lock of hair that had fallen across her cheek. Unbeknownst to her, she wasn't alone in the aisle. Ethan Miller, 28, had been watching her struggle from a few feet away, his own book forgotten in his hand. Ethan was the kind of man who seemed to belong to another era, as if he'd stepped out of a sepia-toned photograph. Tall, at just over 6 feet, his frame was lean but solid, with broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist. His chestnut hair was slightly tousled, the kind of artful disarray that suggested he ran his hands through it absent-mindedly while lost in thought. A faint shadow of stubble dusted his angular jaw, accentuating the sharp lines of his face. His eyes, a striking hazel flecked with gold, held a quiet intensity, like a man who saw the world in layers past, present, and possibility all at once. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and tailored gray trousers that hugged his long legs. A leather watch, its face scratched from years of wear, adorned his wrist, a relic from his grandfather that he never took off. Ethan was a history PhD candidate, his days spent unraveling the stories of forgotten lives in dusty archives. He loved old thing-scrumbling manuscripts, faded maps, the patina of time on worn objects. But more than that, he was drawn to people with souls that felt timeless, people who carried stories in their eyes. And Lena, with her delicate beauty and the way she moved through the library like it was her own world, had caught his attention the moment he saw her. There was something about her, the way her fingers lingered on a book's spine, the way her lips parted slightly as she read, the way her entire being seemed to hum with quiet passion that made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't quite explain. He'd noticed her before, always in this same section, always lost in her own universe. But today, as she stretched for that book, her body arching in a way that made his breath catch, he couldn't stay silent. Her sweater had slipped higher now, revealing the gentle curve of her lower back, the skin there smooth and inviting, like porcelain warmed by the sun. Her jeans hugged the subtle flare of her hips, and the way her calves flexed as she balanced on her toes was almost hypnotic. Ethan's pulse quickened, not just from the sight of her, but from the sudden, irrational urge to be closer, to know her, to hear the voice that belonged to that face. Clearing his throat softly, he stepped forward, his polished Oxford silent on the thick carpet. "Need a hand?" His voice was low, warm, with a faint Boston lilt that made it sound like he was confiding a secret. Lena froze, her outstretched arms still reaching for the book. The sound of his voice sent a shiver down her spine, not from fear, but from something else, something electric. She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. His gaze was steady, those hazel eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart stutter. Up close, she could see the faint freckles across his nose, the way his lips curved into a half smile that was both boyish and knowing. His blazer stretched slightly across his shoulders as he moved, hinting at the strength beneath, and his rolled-up sleeves revealed the faintest hint of a tattoo peeking out from under the cuff of his shirt, a detail that made her curious, hungry to know more. Yeah, she stammered, her voice soft but clear, with a trace of a smile that betrayed her nerves. "It's just up there." She pointed to the book, her slender finger trembling slightly, though she hoped he didn't notice. Ethan's smile widened, and he stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow aisle. He was close enough now that she could smell his scent clean, like cedar and old books, with a hint of something warmer, like sandalwood. He reached up, his arm brushing past hers, and his fingers closed around the spine of Wuthering Heights. But in that moment, their hands collided her soft, delicate fingers, grazing the back of his larger, calloused ones. The contact was fleeting, barely a second, but it was enough to send a jolt through Lena's entire body. His skin was warm, the roughness of his knuckles a stark contrast to her smoothness, and the brief touch left her breathless, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Ethan felt it too. His hand lingered on the book, his fingers still tingling where they'd touched hers. Her hand was small, impossibly soft, and the way her fingers had curled slightly against his made him want to reach for her again, to see if that spark would ignite once more. He pulled the book down slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, and when he handed it to her, their fingers brushed again. This time, it was deliberate, his thumb grazing the side of her hand, testing the waters. Her skin was like silk, and the way her breath hitched told him she felt it too. "Here you go," he said, his voice a shade huskier now, the words carrying a weight that went beyond the simple act of handing her a book. Lena clutched the book to her chest, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "Thanks," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and searching, and in that moment, she saw something in his gaze, something that made her feel seen, wanted, in a way she hadn't felt before. His eyes roamed her face, lingering on her lips for a fraction of a second before returning to her eyes, and the air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. She wanted to say more, to ask his name, to keep him there in that aisle with her. But before she could find the words, he gave her a small nod, that half smile still playing on his lips, and turned to walk away. Lena watched him go, her eyes tracing the line of his back, the way his blazer hugged his shoulders, the confident stride of his long legs. Her fingers tightened around the book, the leather cover cool against her flushed skin, and she realized she was still holding her breath. As Ethan disappeared around the corner, he glanced back, just for a moment, and their eyes met again. It was a look that promised something, beginning, a story yet to be written. Lena's lips curved into a smile, and she pressed the book closer to her heart, already knowing she'd be back tomorrow, hoping to see him again. And in that quiet, sunlit aisle of the Boston Athenaeum, with the scent of old books and the weight of a single touch lingering between them, something had begun. Something faded, like the book in her hands, waiting to unfold. The air in the Boston Athenaeum seemed to hum with a new energy, as if the ancient walls themselves had felt the spark of that fleeting touch. Lena stood frozen in the aisle, her slender fingers still clutching the worn leather cover of Wuthering Heights, the book now a silent witness to the moment that had just unfolded. Her heart raced, a wild rhythm that echoed in her ears, and her skin tingled where Ethan's hand had grazed hers. That brief contact, this warm, calloused fingers against her soft, delicate one-shad, ignited something deep within her, a warmth that spread from her chest to the tips of her toes. She could still feel the ghost of his touch, like a whisper against her skin, and the memory of his hazel eyes, flecked with gold and brimming with quiet intensity, made her breath catch. Lena's petite frame, barely 5'3", seemed to vibrate with the aftershock of that moment. Her cream-colored sweater clung to her gentle curves, the soft fabric accentuating the subtle swell of her chest and the narrow dip of her waist. Her faded blue jeans molded to her slim legs, hugging the gentle flare of her hips and the smooth lines of her thighs in a way that was effortlessly alluring. Her long, raven black hair, loosely tied with a silk scarf, spilled over her shoulders in waves, a few rebellious strands framing her heart-shaped face. Her almond-shaped eyes, a deep chestnut brown, shimmered with a mix of curiosity and something new, something that felt dangerously like desire. Her full lips, naturally pink, parted slightly as she exhaled, her cheeks flushed with a soft rose hue that made her look like she'd just stepped out of a dream. She was still staring at the spot where Ethan had disappeared around the corner when the reality of his presence hit her again. He'd been so close enough for her to catch the faint scent of cedar and sandalwood that clung to him close enough to see the faint freckles dusting his nose, the way his angular jaw tightened when their hands touched. Ethan Miller, though she didn't yet know his name, was a vision of timeless allure. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place in the world but was still searching for something more. His tall, lean frame 6 feet of solid muscle and graceful strength moved with a purpose that was both deliberate and effortless. His chestnut hair, slightly tousled, begged to be touched, and the faint stubble along his jaw added a rugged edge to his otherwise polished appearance. His navy blazer had stretched across his broad shoulders as he reached for the book, hinting at the power beneath, and his rolled-up sleeves revealed forearms corded with muscle, the faint outline of a tattoo peeking out from under his cuff, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. That moment of contact replayed in Lena's mind, vivid and intoxicating. His hand had been larger than hers, his knuckles rough from years of handling old manuscripts, yet there was a gentleness in the way his fingers had brushed hers, as if he'd been afraid to break something fragile. The warmth of his skin had seeped into hers, and for that fleeting second, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them, the library's hush amplifying the electricity between them. She pressed the book closer to her chest, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it could wake the ghosts, rumored to haunt the Athenaeum's upper floors. And then, as if summoned by her thoughts, he reappeared. Lena's breath hitched as Ethan stepped back into the aisle, his hazel eyes locking onto hers with a intensity that made her knees weak. He'd only taken a few steps away, it seemed, before something had pulled him back, perhaps the same magnetic force that kept her rooted to the spot. His lips curved into a small, almost shy smile, but there was a heat in his gaze that belied his calm exterior. He moved toward her, his long legs closing the distance with a slow, deliberate grace, and the air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. "Sorry," he said, his voice low and warm, with that faint Boston lilt that made her stomach flutter. "I didn't mean to startle you back there." He paused, his eyes roaming her face, lingering on the curve of her lips before returning to her eyes. "I just couldn't help myself. You looked like you needed a hand." Lena's lips parted, but no words came. She was too caught up in the way he was looking at her, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. His eyes were mesmerizing, the gold flecks catching the sunlight streaming through the library's arched windows, and the way his gaze softened as it met hers made her feel exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely safe. She managed a small smile, her voice barely above a whisper. I did. Thank you." Ethan's smile widened, and he took another step closer, close enough now that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from smiling often, from living deeply. His blazer hugged his shoulders, the fabric shifting as he moved, and his white shirt was crisp against his tanned skin, the top button undone to reveal a glimpse of his collarbonea detail that made Lena's pulse quicken. His trousers clung to his long legs, the tailored fit accentuating the lean strength of his thighs, and the leather watch on his wrist gleamed faintly, its scratched face a testament to its history. "Let me try that again," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur, as if they were sharing a secret in this sacred space. "I'm Ethan." He extended his hand, and the gesture was so simple, yet it felt momentous, like the opening line of a story they were about to write together. Lena hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes flicking to his hand. It was large, strong, with long fingers and a faint scar across one knuckly hand that had held countless books, traced countless maps, and now waited for hers. She reached out, her smaller hand slipping into his, and the contact was electric. His grip was firm but gentle, his palm warm and slightly rough, and as his fingers closed around hers, she felt a tremor run through her entire body. His thumb brushed lightly against the side of her hand, a deliberate caress that sent a wave of heat curling through her core. She looked up at him, her chestnut eyes wide and shimmering, and saw the same spark mirrored in his gaze. "Lena," she said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. His name felt like a melody on her tongue, and saying hers to him felt like giving him a piece of herself. "Lena?" he repeated, as if savoring the sound. His voice wrapped around her name like a caress, and the way he said it low, intimate, made her feel like she was the only person in the world. He held her hand a moment longer than necessary, his fingers lingering, and when he finally released her, the loss of his touch left her aching for more. For a moment, they stood there, the silence between them heavy with possibility. The library's golden light bathed them, casting soft shadows across Ethan's face, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbones and the curve of his lips. Lena's sweater hugged her delicate frame, the cream fabric catching the light in a way that made her skin glow, and her hair shimmer, liquid obsidian spilled over her shoulders. Her jeans clung to her hips, the denim accentuating the gentle curve of her thighs, and the way she stood, one hip slightly cocked, was unconsciously inviting. Ethan's eyes flicked down her body just for a second, before returning to her face, and the heat in his gaze made her cheeks flush deeper. "Let me help you with that," he said, nodding toward the book still clutched against her chest. His voice was softer now, almost a whisper, and there was a playful glint in his eyes that made her heart skip. "It looks heavy." Lena laughed, a soft, musical sound that broke the tension. "It's not that heavy," she teased, but she loosened her grip on the book, holding it out to him. As he reached for it, their hands brushed again, and this time it was no accident. His fingers lingered against hers, his thumb grazing the sensitive skin of her wrist, and the contact sent a shiver racing up her spine. His touch was deliberate, testing, and the way his eyes darkened as they met hers told her he felt it too. Their hands stayed there, suspended in the air, the book a flimsy excuse for the connection. Lena's fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't pull away. His hand was warm, steady, and the way his fingers curled lightly around hers felt like a promise. She could feel the pulse in his wrist, a steady rhythm that matched the frantic beat of her own heart, and the realization that he was just as affected made her bold. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice barely audible, but there was a challenge in her eyes, a spark of curiosity that mirrored the one in his. Ethan's lips twitched, that half smile returning, but there was something deeper in his expression. Now, something raw, unguarded. "I couldn't walk away," he admitted, his voice low and rough, like he was confessing a secret he hadn't meant to share. "Not after that." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. That, the touch, the spark, the moment that had shifted something in both of them, like a key turning in a lock. Lena's breath caught, and she felt a pull toward him, an invisible thread drawing her closer. She took a small step forward, her body moving before her mind could catch up, and the space between them shrank to mere inches. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath, the faint outline of muscle beneath his shirt? Ethan's eyes searched hers, and for a moment, she thought he might close the distance, might lean down but instead, he tightened his grip on the book, his fingers brushing hers one last time before he stepped back, breaking the spell. "You're reading Wuthering Heights," he said, his voice steadier now, though the huskiness lingered. "Good choice. It's intense." Lena nodded, her throat tight. "It's my favorite," she said, her voice soft but clear. "There's something about Heathcliff and Kathy, the way they're so consumed by each other. It's messy, but it's real." Ethan's eyes lit up, and she saw a flicker of something recognition maybe, or admiration. "Most people don't get that," he said, his tone warm with approval. "They see the chaos and miss the passion, but you get it." The compliment landed softly, but it hit hard. Lena felt a flush of pride mixed with something deeper, something that made her want to keep talking, to keep him here with her. She tilted her head, her hair spilling over one shoulder, and gave him a small, playful smile. "And what about you? What's your Wuthering Heights?" Ethan chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a thrill through her. He leaned against the shelf, his body relaxed but his eyes still locked on hers, and the casual posture only made him more magnetic. His blazer stretched across his shoulders, the fabric hinting at the strength beneath, and his rolled-up sleeves revealed the lean lines of his forearms, the faint tattoo now more visible, small. "Intricate compass, its needle pointing north. I'm more of a Moby Dick guy," he said, his voice tinged with humor. "All that obsession, chasing something you can never quite catch. It's haunting." Lena raised an eyebrow, her smile turning teasing. "So you're into doomed quests and brooding sailors?" He laughed again, and the sound was like music, warm and infectious. "Something like that," he said, his eyes sparkling. "But I'll admit, I've got a soft spot for Bronte too. There's something about a love that's so fierce, it destroys everything. And yet, you can't look away." Their eyes met again, and the air between them crackled, the playful banter giving way to something heavier, more potent. Lena felt it in her bones, the pull, the tension, the unspoken question hanging between them. She wanted to reach out, to touch him again, to see if that spark would flare into something more. And from the way Ethan was looking at her, his eyes dark and searching, she knew he felt it too. But before either of them could act, a distant cough from another aisle broke the moment, reminding them they weren't alone. Ethan straightened, his smile turning rueful, and he handed the book back to her, his fingers brushing hers one last time. The touch was softer now, almost tender, and it left her aching for more. "I'll let you get back to your book," he said, his voice low and reluctant. "But I hope I'll see you here again, Lena." The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine, and she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I hope so too." He gave her one last look, his eyes lingering on her face, her lips, her eyes, before he turned and walked away, his footsteps soft on the carpet. Lena watched him go, her heart pounding, her body alive with the memory of his touch, his voice, his presence. She pressed the book to her chest, her fingers tracing the spot where his hand had been, and a smile curved her lips. She didn't know what this was, not yet. But she knew one thing for certain. She'd be back tomorrow, and every day after, hoping to find him again, hoping to feel that spark, that tremor, that promise of something more. The Boston Athenaeum seemed to hold its breath as Lena stood in the aisle, her heart still racing from the electric encounter with Ethan. The memory of his touches, warm, calloused fingers brushing hers, the deliberate graze of his thumb against her, wrist lingered like a melody she couldn't shake. Her petite frame, wrapped in a cream-colored sweater that hugged her gentle curves, felt alive with a new kind of energy, as if every nerve in her body had been awakened. Her long, raven black hair cascaded over her shoulders, catching the golden light streaming through the library's arched windows, and her almond-shaped eyes, a deep chestnut brown, shimmered with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. Her full lips, naturally pink, curved into a faint smile as she pressed Wuthering Heights to her chest, the leather cover cool against her flushed skin. Lena's slim legs, encased in faded blue jeans that molded to the subtle flare of her hips and the smooth lines of her thighs, carried her slowly toward the reading room, though her mind was elsewhere. She could still see Ethan's hazel eyes, flecked with gold, the way they darkened as they lingered on her face, her lips. His tall, lean frame, 6 feet of quiet strength, had filled the narrow aisle, his navy blazer stretching across his broad shoulders, his rolled-up sleeves revealing forearms corded with muscle, and the faint outline of a tattoo, a compass that seemed to point toward something unspoken. His voice, low and warm with that faint Boston lilt, echoed in her ears, the way he'd said her name Lena-like. It was a secret he wanted to keep. She was about to settle into a chair, her satchel slung over the back, when a shadow fell across the table. Her breath caught as she looked up, and there he was, Ethan, standing just a few feet away, a book tucked under his arm and that half-smile playing on his lips. Up close, he was even more striking. His chestnut hair was slightly tousled, begging to be touched, and the faint stubble along his angular jaw added a rugged edge to his polished charm. His white shirt was crisp against his tanned skin, the top button undone to reveal a glimpse of his collarbone, a detail that made Lena's pulse quicken. His trousers clung to his long legs, the tailored fit accentuating the lean strength of his thighs, and the leather watch on his wrist gleamed faintly, its scratched face a testament to its history. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. There was a playful glint in his eyes, but also something deeper, something that made her feel like he was asking for more than just a seat. Lena's cheeks flushed, and she nodded, her voice soft but clear. "Not at all." She gestured to the chair across from her, her slender fingers trembling slightly as she set Wuthering Heights on the table. Her sweater shifted as she moved, revealing a sliver of smooth ivory skin at her midriff, and she caught the way Ethan's eyes flicked there, just for a moment, before returning to her face. The heat in his gaze made her heart skip, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers brushing the soft curve of her cheek. Ethan sat down, his movements graceful yet deliberate, and the space between them seemed to shrink, the air charged with the same electricity that had sparked in the aisle. He placed his book-worn copy of Moby Dick on the table, his long fingers lingering on the cover, and Lena couldn't help but notice the strength in his hands, the faint scar across one knuckle, the way his fingers moved with a quiet confidence. He leaned back slightly, his blazer stretching across his shoulders, and his eyes locked onto hers, warm and searching. "I was thinking," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "that we could share a table and maybe a conversation. You seem like someone who has good taste in stories." His lips twitched, that half-smile turning playful, and Lena felt a flutter in her chest. She laughed softly. the sound musical and bright, and tilted her head, her hair spilling over one shoulder in a cascade of liquid obsidian. "Is that your way of saying you want to talk about books?" she teased, her chestnut eyes sparkling with mischief. "Or are you just trying to figure out if I'm as obsessed with Bronte as I seem?" Ethan chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that sent a thrill through her. "A little of both," he admitted, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "But I'm betting you've got more than just Bronte up your sleeve. What else do you love, Lena?" The way he said her name again, soft and intimate, made her breath catch. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the table, her sweater hugging the gentle curve of her chest. "Well," she said, her voice warm and inviting, "I'm a sucker for anything that makes me feel something. Jane Austen for wit, Toni Morrison for soul, and, okay, I'll admit, a good romance novel when I need an escape." She blushed, her cheeks a soft rose, and looked down at the table, her lashes casting delicate shadows on her skin. Ethan's eyes lit up, and he leaned forward too, closing the distance between them. "Romance, huh?" he said, his voice teasing but gentle. "I wouldn't have pegged you for that. You seem deeper than that." Lena raised an eyebrow, her smile turning playful. "Oh, I'm plenty deep," she shot back, her voice laced with mock indignation. "But sometimes you just need a story where people fall in love, and it's messy and beautiful and worth it." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the air between them thickened, her words carrying a weight neither of them could ignore. Ethan's smile softened, and he nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I get that," he said quietly. "There's something about a story that feels inevitable, like the characters were always meant to find each other." His voice was low, almost a whisper, and the way he looked at her made her feel like he wasn't just talking about books. They fell into an easy rhythm, their conversation flowing from books to authors to the stories that had shaped them. Ethan shared his love for Melville's relentless pursuit, for the way history books told stories of people long gone but never forgotten. Lena countered with her passion for poetry, for the way a single line could break your heart or make you soar. Their voices were soft, intimate, as if the library's hush had wrapped them in their own little world. As they talked, they moved to a small cafe corner tucked near a window, where the Athenaeum offered tea and pastries to its patrons. The sunlight streamed through the glass, bathing them in a warm, golden glow that made Lena's skin shimmer and Ethan's eyes gleam like polished amber. They sat at a small, round table, their knees brushing under the cloth, and the accidental contact sent a jolt through Lena's body. She glanced at Ethan, expecting him to pull away, but he didn't. Instead, he let his knee rest lightly against hers, the warmth of his touch seeping through her jeans, and the quiet intimacy of it made her heart race. Ethan poured tea for them both, his movements steady and graceful, and Lena watched his hands, those strong, capable hands that had brushed hers in the aisle. His fingers were long, his knuckles slightly rough, and the faint scar across one caught the light, a small imperfection that only made him more intriguing. He handed her a cup, his fingers grazing hers as he did, and the touch was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of the spark between them. Lena's breath hitched, and she looked up at him, her chestnut eyes wide and searching, only to find him watching her with that same intensity. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The tea was fragrant, a blend of chamomile and lavender, and as they sipped, their conversation turned more personal. Ethan asked about her childhood, about the moments that had made her fall in love with books, and Lena found herself opening up in a way she rarely did. She told him about sneaking novels under the covers with a flashlight, about the library in her small hometown where she'd spent every summer. Her voice was soft, animated, and her hands moved as she spoke, her slender fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. Her sweater shifted slightly, revealing the smooth curve of her collarbone, and Ethan's eyes flicked there, just for a moment, before returning to her face, his gaze warm and attentive. In return, Ethan shared pieces of himself. His summers spent exploring old archives with his grandfather, the historian who'd given him the leather watch he still wore. He spoke of his love for old maps, for the stories they told of places and people long gone, and his voice was low, rich, like a storyteller weaving a spell. Lena listened, captivated, her eyes tracing the lines of his face, the sharp angle of his cheekbones, the curve of his lips, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of a life well lived. His blazer hugged his shoulders, the fabric shifting as he leaned forward, and the way his shirt clung to his chest hinted at the strength beneath, making her wonder what it would feel like to touch him, to feel the warmth of his skin under her fingers. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the table, and their conversation took a playful turn. "Okay," Lena said, her voice teasing as she leaned back in her chair, her hair spilling over one shoulder. "Serious question. When was your first love?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief, but there was a genuine curiosity there, a desire to know him, to peel back the layers of this man who'd walked into her life like a character from one of her novels. Ethan laughed, a deep, warm sound that made her stomach flutter. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, and his eyes locked onto hers, a playful challenge in his gaze. "First love, huh? That's a dangerous question." He paused, his lips twitching, and then his voice softened, turning serious. "I was 16. She was a girl in my history class who loved old movies. We'd sneak into the theater and watch black and white films, and I thought I'd marry her someday." He smiled, but there was a wistfulness in his eyes, a hint of a story left untold. "Didn't work out, but it was real, you know." Lena nodded, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. "I know," she said softly. She hesitated, then decided to share. "Mine was at 17, a boy who wrote poetry. He'd leave little notes in my locker, and I thought that was what love was supposed to be." She laughed, shaking her head. "It wasn't, but it felt like it at the time." Ethan's eyes softened, and he reached across the table, his hand brushing hers as he picked up his teacup. The touch was brief, but it sent a wave of heat through her, and the way his fingers lingered near hers made her wonder if he'd meant to hold her hand instead. "Sounds like we both fell for dreamers," he said, his voice low and warm. "Maybe that's why we're here, chasing stories." Their eyes met, and the air between them crackled, the playful banter giving way to something deeper, more potent. Lena felt it in her bones, the pull, the tension, the unspoken question hanging between them. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to see if that spark would flare into something more. And from the way Ethan was looking at her, his eyes dark and searching, she knew he felt it too. As the afternoon waned, the library grew quieter, the other patrons drifting away, leaving them in their golden-lit corner. The tea had gone cold, but neither of them cared. They were lost in each other, in the stories they shared, in the way their knees brushed under the table, in the way their eyes kept finding each other's. Lena's sweater hugged her delicate frame, the cream fabric catching the light in a way that made her skin glow, and her jeans clung to her hips, the denim accentuating the gentle curve of her thighs. Ethan's blazer stretched across his shoulders, the fabric hinting at the strength beneath, and his rolled-up sleeves revealed the lean lines of his forearms, the compass tattoo now fully visible, a symbol of direction in a moment that felt gloriously uncharted. When they finally stood to leave, the sun was setting, casting a warm, amber glow across the room. Ethan walked her to the library's grand staircase, his hand brushing hers as they moved, and the touch was soft, tentative, but it sent a shiver racing up her spine. At the top of the stairs, he turned to her, his hazel eyes warm and intense. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice low and hopeful, a smile playing on his lips. Lena's heart soared, and she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll be here." He gave her one last look, his eyes lingering on her face, her lips, her eyes, before he turned and descended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. Lena watched him go, her heart pounding, her body alive with the memory of his touch, his voice, his presence. She pressed her hand to her chest, her fingers tracing the spot where his had been, and a smile curved her lips. She didn't know where this was going, not yet. But as she stood there, bathed in the fading light of the Athenaeum, Lena felt like she was living in a story, one that was messy, beautiful, and undeniably worth it. The Boston Athenaeum had become more than a library for Lena Pham. It was now a stage where her heart played out a story she hadn't dared to dream. Each morning, as she walked through its heavy oak doors, the familiar scent of aged paper and polished wood wrapped around her like a promise. The golden light filtering through the arched windows seemed to shine brighter. The hush of the reading rooms felt more intimate, and every creak of the floorboards carried the possibility of Ethan's presence. The memory of their last meeting, their knees brushing under the cafe table, the way his hazel eyes had locked onto hers as he'd said, "Same time tomorrow," lingered like a sweet ache in her chest. Lena's petite frame, barely 5'3", thrummed with anticipation, her every step a quiet prayer that today, like the days before, she would find him waiting. Lena was a vision of effortless allure, her delicate beauty drawing eyes even in the library's subdued elegance. Her long, raven-black hair cascaded in loose waves down her back, catching the light in a way that made it shimmer like liquid obsidian. Today, she wore a soft, emerald green blouse that clung to her gentle curves, the fabric accentuating the subtle swell of her chest and the narrow dip of her waist. The blouse's neckline dipped just low enough to reveal the smooth curve of her collarbone, a tantalizing glimpse of ivory skin that glowed under the library's warm light. Her dark jeans hugged her slim legs, molding to the gentle flare of her hips and the smooth lines of her thighs in a way that was both casual and captivating. Her almond-shaped eyes, a deep chestnut brown, sparkled with a mix of hope and nervous excitement, and her full lips, naturally pink, curved into a faint, secret smile as she moved through the aisles. A leather satchel hung from her shoulder, stuffed with notebooks and novels, but today her mind was on somethinger, someone far more captivating than the pages within. Ethan Miller, at 28, had become a fixture in her thoughts, his presence as constant as the books that lined the Athenaeum's shelves. His tall, lean frame 6 feet of quiet strength, moved with a grace that belied his rugged edges. His chestnut hair, always slightly tousled, begged to be touched, and the faint stubble along his angular jaw added a masculine allure to his otherwise polished appearance. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held a depth that made Lena's heart stutter, as if they saw not just her face but the stories she carried within. He often wore tailored blazers that hugged his broad shoulders, paired with crisp shirts that hinted at the lean muscle beneath, and trousers that clung to his long legs, accentuating the strength of his thighs. The leather watch on his wrist, its face scratched from years of wear, was a relic from his grandfather, and the faint tattoo of a compass on his forearm, a detail Lena had memorized, seemed to point toward her, guiding him back to her side. Their meetings had become a ritual, unspoken but sacred. Each afternoon, Lena would arrive at the library, her heart pounding with anticipation, and there he would be, sometimes in the Gothic literature section, sometimes at their corner table by the cafe, always with a book in hand and that half smile that made her knees weak. They had claimed a corner of their own, a secluded nook near a stained glass window that cast jewel-toned light across the oak table. It was a space where the world outside ceased to exist, where the rustle of pages and the soft cadence of their voices wove a cocoon around them. The nook was tucked behind a row of shelves, hidden from prying eyes, and the intimacy of it made every glance, every touch, feel like a secret shared between lovers. Today, as Lena rounded the corner to their nook, her breath caught at the sight of him. Ethan was already there, leaning back in a chair, his long legs stretched out under the table. His navy blazer was draped over the chair's back, and his white shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing the lean strength of his forearms and the compass tattoo that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. His fingers, long and slightly rough from handling old manuscripts, turned the pages of a book, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, she noted with a smile. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass window painted his face in shades of sapphire and ruby, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbones and the curve of his lips. His hazel eyes flicked up as she approached, and the warmth in his gaze made her heart skip. "Lena," he said, his voice low and warm, with that faint Boston lilt that sent a shiver down her spine. The way he said her name, like it was a melody he'd been humming all day, made her feel seen, wanted, in a way she'd never known. "I was hoping you'd show up." She smiled, her cheeks flushing a soft rose, and set her satchel on the table. "I wouldn't miss it," she said, her voice soft but playful. She slid into the chair across from him, her emerald blouse catching the light, and the movement made her hair spill over one shoulder, a cascade of dark silk that drew Ethan's eyes. His gaze lingered on the curve of her neck, the smooth skin exposed by her blouse's neckline, and the heat in his eyes sent a wave of warmth curling through her core. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, and the space between them seemed to shrink, the air charged with the now familiar electricity. "Wharton today," he said, nodding toward his book, his lips twitching into a smile. "I figured I'd try something a little more romantic. You're rubbing off on me." Lena laughed, a soft musical sound that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Careful," she teased, tilting her head so her hair shimmered in the light. "Next thing you know, you'll be reading Jane Austen and swooning over Mr. Darcy." He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that sent a thrill through her. "Don't tempt me," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "I might just do it to impress you." His eyes locked onto hers, and the playful banter gave way to something deeper. something that made her heart race. They fell into their usual rhythm, trading stories about books, about life, about the little moments that had shaped them. But each meeting felt different now, charged with a growing intimacy that neither could ignore. Their hands brushed more often, when passing a book, when reaching for a teacup, when their fingers accidentally met on the table. Each touch was a spark, a jolt that left Lena breathless, her skin tingling with the memory of his warmth. His hands were strong, his knuckles slightly rough, and the way his fingers curled lightly around hers, even for a moment, felt like a promise. Her own hands, slender and soft, trembled slightly under his touch, and the way his thumb grazed her wrist, deliberate and slow, made her pulse quicken. One afternoon, as they sat in their nook, Ethan brought a book he'd found in the rare manuscripts section, a collection of love letters from the 19th century, bound in faded leather. He opened it carefully, his long fingers handling the fragile pages with reverence, and read her a passage. His voice, low and rich, wove the words into something alive, something that made Lena's heart ache with longing. The letter spoke of a love so fierce it defied time, and as Ethan read, his eyes kept flicking to hers, as if the words were his own. Lena leaned forward, her blouse hugging her delicate frame, and her chestnut eyes shimmered with emotion. When he finished, the silence between them was heavy, electric, and she reached out, her fingers brushing his as she touched the book. "That was beautiful," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her fingers lingered on his, and this time, neither of them pulled away. His hand turned, his palm warm against hers, and his thumb traced a slow circle on her skin, sending a shiver racing up her spine. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, she thought he might lean across the table, might close the distance but he didn't. Instead, he smiled, a soft, almost rueful smile, and squeezed her hand gently before letting go. "You make it easy to get lost in these stories," he said, his voice husky, and the way he looked at her made her feel like she was the story he wanted to read. Their meetings grew longer, stretching into the evenings when the library's chandeliers cast a warm, amber glow across the shelves. They shared tea, pastries, quiet laughter, and stolen glances that lingered too long to be innocent. Lena's wardrobe began to reflect her growing confidence, blouses in soft pastels or rich jewel tones, skirts that hugged her hips and flared at her knees, each outfit chosen with the unspoken hope that Ethan would notice. And he did. His eyes would roam her face, her neck, the curve of her waist before returning to her eyes, and the heat in his gaze made her feel beautiful, desired, like a heroine in one of her beloved novels. Ethan, too, seemed to dress with her in mind. His blazers were always impeccably tailored, his shirts crisp and slightly unbuttoned to reveal a glimpse of his chest, his trousers clinging to his long legs in a way that made Lena's thoughts wander. The compass tattoo on his forearm became a focal point for her, a symbol of the direction they were heading, even if neither of them could name it yet. When he caught her staring at it one day, he smiled, rolling his sleeve higher to give her a better view. "It's for finding my way," he said, his voice low and teasing, but his eyes held hers, and the words felt like they were meant for her. Their touches grew bolder, more deliberate, a brush of his hand against her lower back as they walked through the aisles, her fingers grazing his arm as she laughed at one of his stories. The way their shoulders pressed together when they leaned over a book, their heads so close she could feel his breath on her cheek. Each contact was a step closer to something inevitable, something that made Lena's heart pound like the beat of an EDM track, wild and unrelenting. She felt like she was living in a romance novel, each moment a page in a story that was messy, beautiful, and utterly intoxicating. One evening, as they sat in their nook, the library nearly empty, Ethan reached for her hand across the table. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady, and he held her gaze, his hazel eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "Lena," he said, his voice low and rough, "I don't know what this is, but I don't want it to stop." Her heart soared, and she squeezed his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't either." They sat there, hands entwined, the stained glass window casting a kaleidoscope of color across their faces. Lena's emerald blouse glowed in the light, her hair a dark halo around her delicate features, and Ethan's shirt clung to his chest, his compass tattoo a quiet promise. The world outside their nook didn't exist there, was only the warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, and the feeling that they were on the cusp of something vast and beautiful. As they left the library that night, walking side by side down the grand staircase, their hands brushed, and Ethan caught her fingers, holding them for a moment before letting go. The touch was fleeting, but it lingered, a spark that promised more. Lena looked up at him, her chestnut eyes shimmering, and saw the same promise mirrored in his gaze. The Boston Athenaeum had woven itself into the fabric of Lena Pham's heart, its ancient shelves and golden light, no longer just a backdrop, but a living part of the story she was writing with Ethan Miller. Each day, as she stepped through the heavy oak doors, the familiar scent of old paper and polished wood enveloped her, stirring a quiet thrill that had nothing to do with books and everything to do with him. Their meetings in their secluded nook, the stolen touches, the way his hazel eyes seemed to see straight into her soul, had built a tension that hummed like a live wire. Lena's petite frame, barely 5'3", buzzed with anticipation, her every movement charged with the hope of seeing him, of feeling that spark that had become as essential as breathing. Lena was a vision of delicate allure, her beauty both soft and striking in the library's warm glow. Her long, raven black hair cascaded in loose waves, shimmering like liquid obsidian as it caught the light. Today, she wore a deep, burgundy dress that hugged her gentle curves, the soft fabric clinging to the subtle swell of her chest and the narrow dip of her waist. The dress's neckline dipped low, revealing the smooth curve of her collarbone and a tantalizing glimpse of ivory skin that glowed like porcelain. Its hem flared slightly at her knees, accentuating the slender lines of her legs, and a pair of ankle boots added a touch of understated elegance. Her almond-shaped eyes, a deep chestnut brown, sparkled with a mix of nervous excitement and quiet confidence, and her full lips, naturally pink, curved into a faint, secretive smile as she moved through the aisles. A leather satchel hung from her shoulder, but its contents notebooks, novels felt secondary to the story unfolding in her heart. Ethan, at 28, was a presence that filled the Athenaeum's quiet spaces, his tall, lean frame 6 feet of quiet strength moving with a grace that belied his rugged edges. His chestnut hair, perpetually tousled, begged to be touched, and the faint stubble along his angular jaw added a masculine allure to his polished charm. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held a depth that made Lena's heart stutter, as if they could unravel her secrets with a single glance. Today, he wore a charcoal blazer that hugged his broad shoulders, paired with a crisp white shirt, the top button undone to reveal a glimpse of his tanned chest. His tailored trousers clung to his long legs, accentuating the lean strength of his thighs, and the leather watch on his wrist, its scratched face a relic of his grandfather, gleamed faintly. The compass tattoo on his forearm, now a familiar sight, seemed to pulse with meaning, as if it had always been pointing toward her. Their ritual of meeting in their nook had become a sacred rhythm, each encounter deepening the connection that thrummed between them. The nook, tucked behind a row of shelves near a stained glass window, was their sanctuary, a place where the world outside faded, leaving only the rustle of pages, the soft cadence of their voices, and the electric charge of their proximity. Their touches had grown bolder, his hand lingering on her lower back, her fingers grazing his arm, their shoulders pressing together as they leaned over a book. Each contact was a spark, a promise, and Lena felt herself falling deeper into a story that felt like a romance novel come to life, her heart pounding like the beat of an EDM track, wild and unrelenting. But today was different. The sky outside was heavy with storm clouds, the air thick with the scent of impending rain. As Lena arrived at the Athenaeum, the library felt quieter, more intimate, the usual hum of activity muted by the weather. She made her way to their nook, her burgundy dress swaying with each step, her heart racing with the familiar anticipation. Ethan was there, as always, leaning against the table with a book in hand, Jane Eyre this time, a nod to her love for Bronte that made her smile. His charcoal blazer was draped over the chair, and his shirt clung to his chest, the rolled-up sleeves revealing the compass tattoo that had become her secret obsession. His hazel eyes flicked up as she approached, and the warmth in his gaze was laced with something new, something raw, unguarded, that made her breath catch. "Lena," he said, his voice low and warm, with that faint Boston lilt that sent a shiver down her spine. The way he said her name, like it was a prayer he'd been whispering all day, made her feel seen, desired, in a way that set her heart ablaze. "You look," he paused, his eyes roaming her face, her neck, the curve of her waist, before returning to her eyes. "Beautiful." Her cheeks flushed a soft rose, and she smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. She slid into the chair across from him, her dress catching the light, and the movement made her hair spill over one shoulder, a cascade of dark silk that drew Ethan's gaze. His eyes lingered on the smooth curve of her collarbone, the ivory skin exposed by her dress's neckline, and the heat in his gaze sent a wave of warmth curling through her core. They fell into their usual rhythm, trading stories about books, about life, about the moments that had shaped them. But the storm outside seemed to mirror the tension building within, the air heavy with unspoken words. Their hands brushed as they passed Jane Eyre between them, his fingers lingering on hers, his thumb grazing the sensitive skin of her wrist. The touch was deliberate, electric, and Lena's breath hitched, her chestnut eyes meeting his, searching for the meaning behind the intensity in his gaze. As the afternoon wore on, the storm broke, rain lashing against the library's windows, the sound a soft roar that cocooned them in their nook. The chandeliers flickered, and then, with a sudden crack of thunder, the lights went out, plunging the Athenaeum into a twilight of shadows. The only light came from the stained glass window, its colors muted, but still casting a faint glow across their faces. Lena's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sudden intimacy of the moment. the way the darkness seemed to strip away the barriers between them. Ethan stood, his tall frame moving with quiet grace, and reached for a small lantern kept on a nearby shelf for emergencies. He lit it, the soft flame casting a warm, golden light that danced across his features, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbones and the curve of his lips. He set the lantern on the table, and the glow bathed Lena's face, making her skin shimmer like porcelain, her chestnut eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and something deeper, something that felt like longing. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and rough, as if the darkness had stripped away his usual restraint. He moved closer, standing just inches from her, and the heat radiating from his body made her pulse quicken. Lena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine," but she wasn't, not really. The darkness, the storm, the way he was looking at Harriet was all too much, too potent, and she felt herself teetering on the edge of something vast and beautiful. She stood, her burgundy dress swaying, and the movement brought her closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath, to catch the faint scent of cedar and sandalwood that clung to him. They were alone now, the other patrons having left as the storm intensified, and the library felt like their own private world. Ethan's eyes searched hers, and in the flickering light, she saw something raw, something that made her heart stutter. He took a step closer, closing the distance, and his hand reached out, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was soft, tentative, but it sent a jolt through her entire body, her skin tingling with the memory of every touch that had come before. "Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble, barely audible over the rain. "I need to tell you something." Her breath caught, and she looked up at him, her chestnut eyes wide and shimmering. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling with anticipation, with hope, with the weight of everything they'd been building. He hesitated, his hand still holding hers, his thumb tracing a slow circle on her skin. His eyes roamed her face, lingering on her lips, and the intensity in his gaze made her feel exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely safe. "I come here every day," he said, his voice low and rough. "Not for the books, not for the history, but for you. I come here hoping to see you, to hear your voice, to be near you." The confession hung between them, heavy and electric, and Lena's heart soared, her pulse racing like a wild drumbeat. She felt the truth of his words in her bones, felt the same pull that had drawn her back to the library day after day. She squeezed his hand, her fingers trembling, and took a step closer, her body brushing against his. The contact was electric, the heat of his chest seeping through her dress, and she tilted her head, her lips parting slightly as she looked up at him. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I've been coming here for you too." His eyes darkened, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The rain roared outside, the lantern's flame flickered, and the library's shadows seemed to hold their breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, Lena rose onto her toes, her slender frame stretching toward him. Her hands found his chest, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath. His hands moved to her waist, strong and warm, pulling her closer, and the world narrowed to just the two of them, the space between them shrinking to nothing. She kissed him. Her lips met his, soft and tentative at first, a question asked in the language of touch. His lips were warm, firm, and the faint taste of tea lingered on them, mingling with the scent of cedar that enveloped her. Ethan froze for a fraction of a second, as if stunned, then responded with a hunger that stole her breath. His hands tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him, and his lips moved against hers, deepening the kiss with a slow, deliberate intensity that set her entire body ablaze. Her fingers slid up to his neck, tangling in the soft hair at his nape, and she felt the faint stubble along his jaw graze her skin, a delicious contrast to the softness of his lips. The kiss was everything tender and fierce, a confession and a promise, a spark that flared into a fire. Ethan's hands roamed her back, tracing the curve of her spine through the thin fabric of her dress, and the heat of his touch made her shiver, her body arching into his. Her burgundy dress clung to her curves, the fabric shifting as she pressed closer, and his shirt was warm against her skin, the faint outline of his chest muscles a tantalizing promise. His compass tattoo, now pressed against her side, felt like a brand, a mark of the direction they'd found in each other. They broke apart, breathless, their foreheads resting together, their breaths mingling in the flickering light. Ethan's eyes were dark, his pupils wide, and the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered made her heart ache, with a sweetness she'd never known. "Lena," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I've do that for so long." She smiled, her chestnut eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and brushed her fingers along his jaw, feeling the faint stubble under her touch. "Me too," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her own confession. They stood there, wrapped in each other, the rain a soft symphony outside, the lantern's glow casting shadows across the shelves. The library, with its dusty books and whispered memories, felt like a cathedral, and their kiss a sacred vow. Lena's dress glowed in the light, her hair a dark halo around her delicate features, and Ethan's shirt clung to his chest, his compass tattoo a quiet promise. They were no longer just two people meeting in a library. They were a story, a romance, a flame that burned brighter with each passing day. As the storm raged on, they sank into the chairs in their nook, hands still entwined, their bodies close enough to feel each other's warmth. They didn't speak, didn't need to. The kiss had said everything, had written a new chapter in their story that neither could deny. Lena's heart pounded, her body alive with the memory of his lips, his touch, his confession, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this was only the beginning. The Boston Athenaeum had become a cathedral of whispered promises for Lena Pham and Ethan Miller, its ancient shelves and golden light bearing witness to a romance that felt like it had been written in the stars. The memory of their kiss in the storm-lit library, her lips soft against his hands warm on her waist, the world fading to nothing but the heat of their connection lingered like a melody neither could forget. Each day, as Lena stepped through the heavy oak doors, the familiar scent of old paper and polished wood wrapped around her, stirring a quiet thrill that pulsed with the rhythm of her heart. The library was no longer just a place of books. It was their sanctuary, a stage where their story unfolded, each meeting a new chapter in a tale that was messy, beautiful, and undeniably alive. Lena, at 24, was a vision of delicate allure, her petite frame barely 5 feet 3 moving, with a grace that drew eyes even in the Athenaeum's subdued elegance. Her long, raven-black hair cascaded in loose waves, shimmering like liquid obsidian as it caught the light. Today, she wore a soft lavender sweater that hugged her gentle curves, the fabric accentuating the subtle swell of her chest and the narrow dip of her waist. Her dark jeans clung to her slim legs, molding to the gentle flare of her hips and the smooth lines of her thighs in a way that was both casual and captivating. Her almond-shaped eyes, a deep chestnut brown, sparkled with a mix of hope and quiet confidence, and her full lips, naturally pink, curved into a faint, secretive smile as she moved through the aisles. A leather satchel hung from her shoulder, stuffed with notebooks and novels, but her thoughts were consumed by Ethan, by the promise of his presence, by the story they were writing together. Ethan, at 28, was a presence that filled the library's quiet spaces, his tall, lean frame 6 feet of quiet strength moving, with a grace that belied his rugged edges. His chestnut hair, perpetually tousled, begged to be touched, and the faint stubble along his angular jaw added a masculine allure to his polished charm. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held a depth that made Lena's heart stutter, as if they could unravel her secrets with a single glance. Today, he wore a tailored navy blazer that hugged his broad shoulders, paired with a crisp white shirt, the top button undone to reveal a glimpse of his tanned chest. His trousers clung to his long legs, accentuating the lean strength of his thighs, and the leather watch on his wrist, its scratched face, a relic of his grandfather, gleamed faintly. The compass tattoo on his forearm, now a symbol of their shared journey, seemed to pulse with meaning, as if it had always been pointing toward her. Their meetings in their secluded nook had become a sacred ritual, a rhythm that anchored their days. The nook, tucked behind a row of shelves near a stained glass window, was their haven, a place where the world outside ceased to exist. The rustle of pages, the soft cadence of their voices, the electric charge of their proximity, it all wove a cocoon around them, making every glance, every touch, feel like a secret shared between lovers. Since their kiss, their connection had deepened, each meeting charged with a quiet intensity that spoke of promises yet to be made. They didn't speak of love, not yet, but it was there in the way their hands found each other, in the way their eyes lingered, in the way their laughter filled the air like music. Today, as Lena rounded the corner to their nook, her heart leaped at the sight of him. Ethan was already there, leaning back in a chair, his long legs stretched out under the table. His blazer was draped over the chair's back, and his shirt was rolled up to his elbows, revealing the lean strength of his forearms and the compass tattoo that had become her secret obsession. He held a small, leather-bound notebook in his hands, his fingers tracing the edges as if it held a treasure. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass window painted his face in shades of sapphire and ruby, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbones and the curve of his lips. His hazel eyes flicked up as she approached, and the warmth in his gaze was laced with something new, something tender, almost vulnerable, that made her breath catch. "Lena," he said, his voice low and warm, with that faint Boston lilt that sent a shiver down her spine. The way he said her name, like it was a melody he'd been humming all day, made her feel seen, desired, in a way that set her heart ablaze. "I was hoping you'd come." She smiled, her cheeks flushing a soft rose, and set her satchel on the table. "I wouldn't miss it," she said, her voice soft but playful. She slid into the chair across from him, her lavender sweater catching the light, and the movement made her hair spill over one shoulder, a cascade of dark silk that drew Ethan's gaze. His eyes lingered on the smooth curve of her neck, the ivory skin glowing under the library's warm light, and the heat in his gaze sent a wave of warmth curling through her core. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, and the space between them seemed to shrink, the air charged with the now familiar electricity. "I brought something for you," he said, his lips twitching into a smile as he slid the notebook across the table. "It's not a book, not exactly, but I think you'll like it." Lena's curiosity piqued, and she reached for the notebook, her slender fingers brushing his as she took it. The touch was deliberate, electric, and her breath hitched, her chestnut eyes meeting his, searching for the meaning behind the gesture. The notebook was worn, its leather soft from years of handling, and as she opened it, she saw pages filled with Ethan's handwriting, neat, deliberate, with sketches of maps and compasses in the margins. Her heart skipped as she realized it was a journal, a collection of his thoughts, his stories, his dreams. "I've been writing in it for years," he said, his voice low and rough, as if the admission cost him something. "But lately, it's been about you." His eyes held hers, and the vulnerability in his gaze made her heart ache with a sweetness she'd never known. Lena's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, her eyes scanning the words. There were entries about their meetings, about the way her laughter lit up the library, about the moment he'd first seen her reaching for Wuthering Heights. There were sketches of hair, a curve of her cheek, a strand of her hair, the way her lips curved when she smiled, her throat tightened, and she looked up at him, her chestnut eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is beautiful." He smiled, a soft, almost shy smile, and reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His fingers were warm, steady, and the way his thumb traced a slow circle on her skin sent a shiver racing up her spine. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice husky. "And I wanted you to know what you mean to me." The confession hung between them, heavy and electric, and Lena's heart soared, her pulse racing like a wild drumbeat. She squeezed his hand, her fingers trembling, and leaned forward, her lavender sweater hugging her delicate frame. "You mean so much to me too," she said, her voice barely a whisper. But the weight of her words filled the space between them. They sat there, hands entwined, the stained glass window casting a kaleidoscope of color across their faces. The library was quiet, the other patrons scarce, and the nook felt like their own private world. Their touches grew bolder, brush of his fingers along her wrist, her hand resting on his arm, their knees brushing under the table. Each contact was a spark, a promise, and Lena felt herself falling deeper into a story that felt like a romance novel come to life, her heart pounding with a rhythm that was both wild and tender. As the afternoon waned, they moved to the aisles, wandering through the shelves, their hands brushing as they reached for books. In a secluded corner, hidden by towering shelves, Ethan pulled her close, his hands on her waist, and stole a kiss. It was soft, lingering, a quiet vow that made her heart soar. His lips were warm, firm, and the faint taste of tea lingered on them, mingling with the scent of cedar that enveloped her. Her fingers curled into his shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and she pressed closer, her lavender sweater glowing in the dim light, her hair a dark halo around her delicate features. They didn't make promises, didn't speak of the future, but their actions said enough. Each day, they returned to the Athenaeum, to their nook, to each other. They shared quiet laughter, stolen kisses, secret embraces in the shadows of the shelves. Ethan's compass tattoo became a touchstone for Lena, a symbol of the direction they were heading, even if neither could name it yet. Her burgundy dress from the night of their first kiss, her lavender sweater today, the way her jeans hugged her hips, all of it became part of their story, a tapestry of moments woven together by glances, touches, and unspoken vows. One evening, as they sat in their nook, the library bathed in the warm glow of chandeliers, Ethan pulled out the notebook again. He opened it to a blank page and handed her a pen, his hazel eyes warm and intense. "Write something," he said, his voice low and teasing. "A line, a word, anything. Let's make this ours." Lena's heart skipped, and she took the pen, her slender fingers brushing his. She thought for a moment, then wrote a single sentence, her handwriting small and deliberate. When she slid the notebook back to him, Ethan read it, his lips curving into a smile that made her heart ache. He didn't share what she'd written, but he closed the notebook and looked at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that stole her breath. "Lena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "if books brought us together, maybe love will keep writing the rest of our story." The words hung between them, a promise and a question, and Lena's heart soared, her chestnut eyes shimmering with hope. She reached for his hand, her fingers entwining with his, and nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe it will." They left the library that night, walking side by side down the grand staircase, their hands brushing, their laughter soft in the quiet. The Athenaeum's heavy doors closed behind them, but the story didn't end there. Each day, they would return to their nook, to their kisses, to the pages they were writing together. But what lay ahead, the chapters yet to come, the promises yet to be made, the love yet to be named, was a mystery, a blank page waiting to be filled. And as Lena stepped into the cool Boston evening, Ethan's notebook tucked in her satchel, she felt the weight of that mystery, the delicious uncertainty of what was to come. Their story was far from over, and the next chapter, whatever it held, was waiting just beyond the horizon. Want to know what happens next? Stay tuned to my channel for the continuation of Lena and Ethan's story, where new pages will unfold and the heart of their romance will be revealed.